in order to share these good practices with the states. In addition, there are national policies that are absolutely strategic. For example, the Ministry of Gender Policy in Uruguay has done a great deal in this regard, Paraguay as well, in Colombia and Ecuador, the Dominican Republic, and Panama. One also finds such initiatives also in the area of strengthening or capacities or capacity building. Here, there's a particular mandate from the Assembly, and that is to also work internally with the other areas of the organization. We have worked with the IICA on designing a course which will be free for rural women. We have also worked with SEDI in order to discuss in the context of with them on the project on economic empowerment and women's economic empowerment, and they are placing emphasis on Caribbean and Central American women so that they can benefit from the digital economy in the context of its program. There's also a cooperative program in Uruguay with a special focus on education, training, and financing productive linkages in cooperatives with young women on rural life. There's also a project on indigenous collaborative tourism of the Americas, which develops an exchange of information and the management of tourism businesses, and which are properties managed by rural women. With SARE, the Secretariat for Rights and Equity, we have wanted to bring rural women to the annual meeting on social inclusion, and so as to draw attention to the vulnerability of rural women. We have also worked at the last Ministerial and Social Development, which was held in the Dominican Republic, working on protection policies, mindful of the value of care, which is something that rural women have been raising. And finally, on citizen participation, as regards civil society, we've been able to introduce a person who is a leader in this area. We also have to, what comes next, we have to continue coordinating our internal work, continue disseminating the design, and with the design focused on a call to action. I'm pleased to say that with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, we're beginning to pull together a hearing before the Inter-American Commission to look at the situation of rural women in the Americas and to generate recommendations in this regard. This year we want to go into greater depth in our work with rural women of the English-speaking Caribbean to supplement everything that has been done in the Americas. And of course, I conclude by highlighting the importance of financing for each of the mandates handed to us in the framework of this organization. This is something we've been carrying out these mandates with our own resources and with some investments of the social inclusion program of CAF. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Secretary Mora Mora. And next, I would ask that the Secretariat project the comments by Luz Aro Guanga, who's Executive Secretary of the Network of Rural Women of Latin America and the Caribbean. Please go ahead.
Saludos cordiales desde la Amazonía.
Cordial greetings from the Ecuadorian Amazon. I am a Ecuadorian peasant, and I'm Secretary of the Network of Rural Women of Latin America and the Caribbean. I'd like to extend greetings to all the distinguished authorities, Mr. Benoni Belli, Niurka Palacios, Luis Almagro, Alejandra Mora Mora, and Tamisha Lee. I'd like to thank you on behalf of and all of the authorities who made possible the adoption of the decade of all women, adolescents, girls in the rural settings in the Americas, 2024-2034. In the wake of the 23 June Declaration, we set out to work, and we have had events in the region with the participation of at least 500 rural women, not only from Red LAC, but from different social organizations, in order to pull together our hemispheric agenda, which today constitutes a roadmap for each of us. The antecedents that have helped us mobilize are having had a political agenda on rural women with certain main lines, to have the proclamation of the decade by the OAS. Thank you very much for that great work that's been done to bring about greater justice for rural women, adolescents, and girls. And then the also with 3 lines for implementing the decade, but we've also had these forums for gathering, exchange, dialogue, and analysis in order to draw up this hemispheric agenda, which we are presenting to you today. And it's not an isolated document done from the Executive Secretariat. No, it is done collectively, and at the origins are the various meetings that we have held in Panama, Chile, Ecuador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and other events that we've held. But we have also found the commitment and support from different international organizations and governments. And we would like this to help mobilize the human, technical, and political will in order to amplify the voices of rural women so that we can have an impact from below in the various decision-making processes in generating public policies. We want to give guidance to institutional and governmental action for coordinating. And the idea is to constantly motivate the states. So we have had 3 main pillars, which are strengthening the capacities and skills of rural women, but also that requires investment in human talent, because if we don't go with human talent, then we might not see major or significant results from this decade. So we need to focus on human talent. There's also the issue of care in rural settings. We take care of seeds for healthy food, but we also need to have statistics, and we need to pull together data that allows us to understand what is our current situation, where are we midway through the decade, and where we'll be at the end of the decade to gauge gains. But for this, we have 3 strategic lines of implementation. First is to bring about spaces for giving visibility to our action, and also for promoting the protection and defense of the rights, not only our rights, but also the rights of nature. We also want to promote the empowerment and strengthening of the leadership of women, adolescent women, and girls, because these will be the women of tomorrow. Many women have participated. The objectives is the land ownership, which women deserve. Second is protection and distribution of water. The third is eradicating violence and supporting rights. Fourth is to strengthen political participation of rural women, reaching decision-making spaces. Fifth, reduce digital gaps, because this can be an instrument for local management and exercise of rights, but also climate change, because it impacts us, and we want to continue living in rural areas despite the myriad difficulties that we face. We want to live in dignity in the rural areas, and we thank you so much for your patience. So I'm very happy to have been with you, albeit by this means. I would have loved to have been with you personally, but that time will come, so thank you so much. I ask the Secretariat of the Inter-American Commission of Women to please thank Luz Arowenga for her participation. Just a rectification, this item was requested to be on the agenda by Mexico with the co-sponsorship of all of the other countries mentioned earlier. We apologize to the delegation of Mexico for not having mentioned Mexico's initiative at the outset of the session. Next, the Executive Secretariat of SIM reported that Ms. Tamisha Lee, president of the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers, is unfortunately unable to be with us this afternoon. And in her place, we're pleased to have Ms. Natalia Reed, who is president of the cluster of the Network of Rural Women Producers of Jamaica and facilitator of restorative justice. Ms. Reed, welcome. You have the floor.
Senora Reed.
Ms. Reed, if you could please ask for the floor on the Kudo system.
Miss Reed, if you are listening, please. Yeah, now I think we can proceed. You can proceed. Thank you.
Esteemed members of the Permanent Council, distinguished delegates, honored guests, greetings from Jamaica. Though I joined virtually on behalf of Ms. Tamisha Lee, her heart and the heart of the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers is with you in recognizing this vital Inter-American Day of Women, Adolescents, and Girls in Rural Settings. We extend our gratitude to the OAS for establishing the Inter-American Decade for the rights of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings of the Americas, a crucial framework that Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers wholeheartedly supports. We stand united in acknowledging that the strength, resilience, and unwavering spirit of these women and girls are the lifeblood of our nations. They are not merely beneficiaries of development, they are its drivers, its innovators, and its most effective agents of change. For over 2 decades, JNRWP has been dedicated to empowering these essential figures in Jamaica. We work directly with the farmers, agro-processors, and community leaders who feed our country, build our economies, and preserve our heritage. We see both the immense potential and the systemic barriers that shape their daily lives. In this spirit, I want to focus my time today on what we must prioritize, what opportunities we can seize, and what challenges we must confront to truly advance the well being of rural women, adolescents, and girls across the hemisphere. In order to ensure the success of this Inter American Decade, we must prioritize, firstly, the economic sovereignty. We must dismantle the obstacles that hinder access to fair markets, credit, and resources. Let us create a future where their economic contributions are not just recognized, but rewarded with true equity. Secondly, we think about knowledge being power. Education and training are not privilege, but rights. We must invest in equipping rural women and girls with the skills they need to thrive, from sustainable agriculture to digital literacy, empowering them to adapt, innovative, and they lead. Thirdly, we look at a voice that resounds. We must ensure that rural women, adolescents, and girls have a seat at every decision making table. Their perspectives are not an addendum, they are essential to crafting effective and equitable policies. We look at stewards of sustainability. Rural women are often the keepers of invaluable traditional knowledge and the very foundation of sustainable practices. We must empower them to lead the charge in combating climate change and protecting our shared natural heritage. Lastly, we look at digital and physical connectivity. In an interconnected world, access to technology and infrastructure is paramount. We must bridge the digital divide and ensure that rural communities are not left behind. To do this, we have the opportunity to one, champion agritourism, to showcase the beauty and cultural richness of our rural landscapes, while empowering women and girls to become entrepreneurs and custodians of their heritage. Secondly, strengthening cooperatives to foster collective action, enabling women and girls to build resilient businesses, enhance their bargaining power, and create sustainable economic networks. We also look at harnessing digital innovation to revolutionize agriculture, expand market access, and provide access to vital information, transforming rural livelihoods and empowering a new generation of leaders. We also looked into cultivating youth leaders to inspire and equip young women and girls to embrace agriculture, innovation, and leadership, ensuring the sustainability of our rural communities for decades to come. Yet, we must address the persistent challenges. One, land rights and inequity. Securing land ownership for women and girls is not just a matter of fairness, it is the fundamental of their economic empowerment and long term security. We look at climate vulnerability. Rural women and girls bear a disproportionate burden of climate change. We must invest in adaptation, resilience building, and access to climate smart solutions. We looked at infrastructure gaps. Inadequate infrastructure continues to isolate rural communities, limiting access to essential services and perpetuating the cycle of poverty. We also looked at entrenched inequality. Discriminatory social norms and practices continue to undermine the potential of women and girls, restricting their opportunities and limiting their full participation in society. Now, the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers stand firmly committed to the Inter-American Decade for the rights of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings of the Americas. We pledge to work collaboratively with governments, civil society, and our partners across the hemisphere to achieve its ambitious yet essential goals. Let us seize this decade as an opportunity to transform the landscape of rural women and girls. Let us ensure their voices are heard, their contributions are valued, and their potential is unleashed, driving progress and prosperity for generations to come. Thank you for your time and for your attention.
Muito obrigado, senhor.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reed, for your presentation. I now offer the floor to any delegations that wish to speak on this point of the agenda. I give the floor to the delegation of Mexico. Ambassador, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Mexico is grateful for all of the presentations and the leadership that Panama has taken in the OAS in recent years as regards this agenda. Based on the intersectional nature of the feminist foreign policy of Mexico, we acknowledge the importance of noting that women, adolescents, and girls are not a homogeneous group. And so they face various concomitant and varied forms of discrimination. On designating 17 April as the Inter-American Day of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings, Mexico recognizes the importance of there being substantive equality The differences should not be used to continue or to justify historical structural inequalities that persist to the detriment of their human rights. Diversity is a source of wealth, and it is a strength of states that are committed to representative democracy. In Mexico, the rural world is a concept relative to the size of the population. We consider as rural all of those localities with fewer than 2,500 inhabitants. Based on this criterion, the National Survey on Households and Expenditures of 2022 estimated that 44.4% of women in Mexico live in rural settings, which is a bit more than 16 million women. In addition, the population of women in rural areas is considerably younger than in the rest of the country. Half of the women in rural areas are 29 years old or younger. The rural life, even in the 21st century, has serious shortcomings when it comes to labor benefits and human rights. The rural settlements of our region are still characterized by a greater presence of indigenous population. In the urban areas of Mexico, indigenous women account for 22.5% of the population compared to 43.7% in rural localities. President Claudia Sheinbaum established 2025 as the Year of Indigenous Women. The Secretariat, Ministry of Culture, headed up by Claudia Gurdiel, indicated that we could not think about a multicultural country such as Mexico without taking into account the determinant role of indigenous women, since they are the ones who conserve and pass on the culture of ancestral knowledge, which make up our national identities and our national pride going back to pre-colonial times. It is urgent to give visibility to their contributions, to listen to them, to address their needs, and to provide them sufficient and adequate conditions for accessing and exercising all of their human rights in conditions of equality. Based on the relevant inter-American instruments, Mexico will continue promoting respect, protection, and promotion of the human rights of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural areas based on the principle of equality and non-discrimination. My delegation is grateful for and acknowledges the work of the Inter-American Commission of Women to give visibility to this agenda, forging partnerships and coordinating with other regional institutions. And we urge the member states to continue supporting the work of civil society and of the and likewise of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to benefit women in all of their diversity throughout our region. Thank you, Chair. I now give the floor to the delegation of Peru.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Permanent Mission of Peru, I'd like to thank the Permanent Council and those delegations that requested the inclusion of this point on the order of the day, and the panelists for the invaluable information that they provided. We recognize the valuable work carried out by the SEAM and the Secretariat for Access and Equity of the OAS, as for looking out for the rights of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings in the Americas, 2024 to 2034. In Peru, more than 30 million women live in rural areas, and they face multiple challenges tied to access to basic services, justice, economic opportunities, and protection against gender-based violence. Given those gaps, Peru has maintained a consistent political will to support women's economic opportunity and access to development opportunities. Our strategy for entrepreneurship for women and indigenous women has helped more than 800,000 women in rural settings, indigenous women as well, with a cumulative of investment of several $1 million. And we have designated almost $3 million to focus on women in rural areas to directly benefit producers in different districts in the country. On the other hand, Peru recently approved a multi-sectoral strategy for fighting gender-based violence by guaranteeing holistic care and centralized care for women living in rural areas. In addition, in March of this year, the Women's Ministry and for populations in living in vulnerability has a model that aims to coordinate programs that are already existing at the state level to make them more effective in helping women living in these areas. Mr. Chair, Peru reaffirms its commitment to concrete actions in favor of this population, vulnerable populations, in particular women living in rural areas. We will continue to working to open access to economic opportunities to women, basic services, and protecting women's rights and those of adolescents and young girls living in rural settings. Thank you. Thank you. Colombia, you have the floor, Ambassador. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to all. We join the condolences expressed for the death of Pope Francis. Thank you for including this point on the agenda, and to all of the speakers and your contributions. Gustavo Petro, our president, and the Vice President Francia Marquez, a woman from a rural area, are fully committed to the institutionalization of the Inter-American Day for all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings. And we reaffirm our backing for the Inter-American Plan for 2024-2034. Colombia called the decade as such so that women wouldn't just be recognized as being deserving of rights, but also become protagonists for transformations that we need so desperately in the region. This was remarked on by the executive secretary of the SEAM. We work together to guarantee their significant partnership in all areas of society so that their equality can be concretely seen in every corner of the country and the hemisphere. Rural women have been historically the heart of community care. Their contributions go much farther than simple agricultural production. They build and form protective and caring networks throughout their communities, oftentimes without remuneration or social protection. And it is essential in order to move towards social justice to make their role more visible in the economy of care. This is a historic debt that we have to pay, all of us. Our feminist foreign policy that guides our foreign actions, Colombia recognizes that recognizing the rights of rural women is a promotion of human rights and common well-being, and that is why we firmly back the call on the part of the SEAM to create conditions in which rural women will be able to access services, health, education, justice, financial autonomy, and political leadership. We reaffirm our commitment to the recognition, protection, and promotion of all rights of rural women, rural workers, Indigenous women, and Afro-descendant women whose voices, knowledge, and leadership have been fundamental for the building of peace in our region, as well as food sovereignty, environmental protection, and sustainable development in our territories. In this line, I would like to share a few concrete areas of progress that the government of Petro and Francia Marquez have attained. We have fought for an intersectional initiative that until now has helped more than 6,000 rural women get access to land and other opportunities. In November of 2024, we launched a special program for adjudication of lands that recognize the unpaid work, as a criteria for adjudication, guaranteeing access to land, technical assistance, financial assistance, and holistic support for women living in rural areas who have been victims of crimes or forced displacement, among other forces. We have always also guaranteed the participation of more than 600 rural women's organizations in the design and implementation of public policies. Through those efforts and that progress achieved, Colombia has also called on greater coordination with the SEAM and civil society for an agenda that will require sustainable financial support, production, and intersectional knowledge, as well as effective mechanisms for follow-up and accountability. We also propose that rural women in all of their diversity be protagonists of the next Summit of the Americas with a vote and a place in all decision-making that might have a direct impact in their lives and on their lands. We in Colombia believe firmly that the country will be truly fertile when equality flourishes. Here, we recognize the knowledge of all rural women in the territory. Thank you. Costa Rica, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to all of you. Costa Rica also joins the commemoration of the Inter-American Day of All Women, Adolescents, and Girls in the Rural Settings, recognizing the transformative and protagonistic role that they carry out in our communities. We promoted, together with other states, the inclusion of this topic in the Permanent Council's agenda today, particularly thanks to the head of the SEAM, Minister Neuca Palacios, the Minister of Women of Panama, and Executive Secretariat, Alexandria Mora Mora of the SEAM. We are so thankful to your leadership on our hemispheric agenda, and we are also grateful to the panelists who have contributed today. This day invites us to reflect on the Declaration of Rights for Rural Women in the Americas, which is a historical landmark that gathers together the leadership and contributions of all women and recognizes their essential role as keepers of our ancestral knowledge, biodiversity, food security, and as agents for sustainable change and growth, as well as social cohesion. In Costa Rica, the National Institution of Women and the head, Cynthia Hernandez, have pushed forward key initiatives to highlight the leadership of rural women, particularly in the economic field. The International Fora of Rural Women is a space that brings together about 100 women from the 29 rural areas of the country and is a product of advisory sessions held in April, and the first meeting of the organization was held this year. And we saw the presentation of a strategy that focused on reducing gaps and strengthening the capacities of these women. We have a plan of action for 2026 with a focus on economic advancement, decision-making, socio-environmental development, and others. In 2023, we also launched an action plan for gender equality in climate change. This included proposals from rural women, and UNAM and MINAI coordinate with other local organizations and civil society to focus on 5 strategic axes that try to focus on gender equality and climate change in our national agenda. That same year, Costa Rica was the headquarters of the first international meeting for rural women of the Caribbean. We had participation from 4 different main areas, and we talked about access to land, entrepreneurship, and overcoming violence in all of its forms. In addition, since 2023, we have developed, in cooperation with the ICA, with headquarters in Costa Rica, technological guidelines in 2 different areas in order to close the technological gap, overcome gender inequality, and highlight rural women's leadership through tools such as drones, digital maps, and geolocators, electronic forms, and digital presence. We were looking to invite their active participation in sustainable development. Mr. Chair, Costa Rica reaffirms its commitment to the promotion and protection of the human rights of women living in rural settings. As they take up these technologies, they will better be able to build or contribute to building more sustainable and peaceful societies. Because when a woman in a rural area has access to greater rights, the whole community flourishes. And this is not just an act of justice, but it is an investment rather in the present and the future of our societies. Finally, I would like to echo the homage paid to Maria Elena Moyano, which was installed by the Permanent Mission of Peru. She was a transformer in Latin America, and she belongs in the Hall of Heroes in this beautiful building. And here we are honoring 10 women who were agents of change and who transformed our region, and it is an honor to also recognize there Angela Cunha Brown, who was a lawyer and suffragist, and the first female ambassador recognized by this organization. To conclude, we hope that this day will inspire all of us to continue building contexts where every woman, every adolescent, and every girl can, and everywhere, but particularly in rural areas, have all the tools, technological tools, particularly necessary to enact change. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Canada, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Canada is pleased to highlight this first Inter-American Day, and we thank the CIM and today's presenters for their leadership. We also commemorate the beginning of this decade by underlining the importance of promoting and protecting the rights of women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings. These are essential. They are essential to our economic and social fabric and that of our communities, but they continue to face disproportionate obstacles, notably gender-based violence, a lack of access to basic services, and underrepresentation in decision-making spaces. We would like to particularly echo the need for overcoming these cross-cutting challenges that are faced by Indigenous women and Afro-descendant women in rural areas.
Canada is a proud partner with CIM in the implementation of a project, Feminist Partnerships to Strengthen the Gender Equality Agenda, which supports women's rights organizations, including rural women organizations for women in rural areas and Indigenous women, to defend and promote and advance gender equality in their communities. By building their capacity to advocate and mobilize communities for change in policies, legislation, and services, we help them effectively challenge and transform entrenched social norms and practices. Canada also supports the Inter-American Human Rights Commission by providing funding to a project called Increasing Prevention and Defense of Human Rights of Women and Girls in Latin America and the Caribbean. Working with other member states, this project aims to protect vulnerable rural communities, addressing gender-based violence, and improve access to justice for all women, including Indigenous and Afro-descendant women and girls. Canada is committed to continuing its work with member states, the CIM and IACHR, to help build inclusive, equitable, and resilient rural communities across our hemisphere. Thank you, Chair.
Passo a palavra,
Delegate from Santa Lucia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. At the outset, my delegation expresses profound appreciation to the presenters on this important topic. My delegation is pleased to join other delegations in requesting this agenda item. The government and people of St. Lucia proudly join the hemisphere in commemorating the first Inter-American Day of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings, a day dedicated to recognizing the immense value, resilience, and contributions of women and girls who live in and work in rural communities. Rural women and girls are the quiet force behind many of our island's most vital sectors, especially in agriculture, community development, food security, and environmental stewardship. They are caretakers, cultivators, entrepreneurs, educators, and leaders. This historic observance is an opportunity for us to reaffirm our national commitment to gender equity, rural development, and social inclusion. It also aligns with our ongoing efforts to address the structural barriers that rural women and girls face in accessing education, healthcare, land ownership, financial services, and leadership opportunities. The government of St. Lucia has implemented a range of programs and policies aimed at improving the lives of rural women and girls, recognizing their vital role in agriculture, community development, and family well-being. These efforts are aligned with the country's broader goals of gender equality, poverty reduction, and sustainable development. The OAS, however, has a role to play in advancing the rights, empowerment, and well-being of rural women and girls across the hemisphere, as stipulated in Operative Paragraph 3 of the resolution, establishing the Inter-American Day of All Women, Adolescents, and Girls in Rural Settings. We note the report from Executive Secretary Mora Mora, and we look forward to a deliberate attention on the priorities of rural women, adolescents, and girls in the Caribbean. As a principal multilateral platform for cooperation in the Americas, the OAS is uniquely positioned to champion policies, mobilize resources, and coordinate action to ensure that the voices and needs of rural women and girls are fully integrated into regional development agendas. The OAS must continue to be a champion for equity and inclusion, using its influence to ensure that rural women and girls, including in the Caribbean, are empowered to thrive and contribute fully to the prosperity and resilience of the Americas. Thank you.
Passo a palavra dele.
Panama, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This delegation would like to begin by thanking you for including this point on the order of the day, which was requested by this permanent mission, and also express our thanks for the valuable contributions by the Minister of Women of Panama and Chair of the SEAM, Madam Palacios, and then Alejandra Mora Mora as well, the Executive Secretary of the SEAM, and Luz Jara Wanga, the head of Red Lac, and Tamisha Lee, the head of the Rural Women Producers Network in Jamaica. Panama has been a leader in promoting rural women's rights. In 2023, our delegation observed the Declaration of all women, adolescents, and children in rural settings in the Americas in the General Assembly of our organization, which also designated the decade of women under the same name. We also promoted the resolution that designated on April 18th as the International Day of All Women, Adolescents, and Girls living in rural settings, today being celebrated by this Permanent Council. This is more than a symbol. It is a roadmap for structural transformation. And in Panama, that transformation started to manifest in 2023 in October with the presentation of the Economic Agenda for Rural Women, which was elaborated in a participatory manner with many women involved, and aimed to close the intractable breach gaps and to develop public policies that focused on women, their rights, and territorial access. That effort was carried out together with various authorities and rural women's organizations, indigenous women's organizations, Afro-descendant organizations, and others, together with PNUD, CAF, and the Foundation CEDES. We are profoundly grateful to the tireless work of Red Lac, whose regional coordination has been necessary in order to really focus our agenda. We are faced by several striking numbers. Almost half of women living in rural areas are living in extreme poverty, and 40% of them in poverty. Many women do not have access to the same opportunities and economic opportunities because of unequal pay and lack of economic opportunities. And this is not just a moral imperative, but also a determining factor for sustainable development. Women in rural settings are agents of change. They lead the family agenda, they pass on ancestral knowledge, they sustain their communities, and they feed our economies. And that is why Panama reaffirms its firm commitment and active participation in their participation in decision making. This is a unique opportunity to advance towards concrete steps that will bring us to a greater peace and prosperity, as well as equality for women in our region. From the SEAM and in coordination with all of the authorities involved in this transformation, we want to make sure that women, adolescents, and girls living in rural settings have access to the opportunities they so deserve. Ecuador, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are grateful for the information provided by the Executive Secretariat of the SEAM, as well as the valuable presentations by our distinguished panelists this afternoon. This dialogue within the framework of the Inter-American Day is a historic opportunity to pay a profound historic debt which has been hovering over our communities and societies for too long. Particularly, this delegation would like to highlight and thank the work of Dr. Luz Arawanga. As you've heard, she is the head of Red LAC, and we saw a regional agenda pushed forth with a feminist perspective, and we value her management and the spirit of the design there, with commitment to social justice, sovereignty of peoples, and the right to women to live in dignity, whether it be in the city or in the country. According to data from our national data centers in the country, about 700,000 women live in rural areas, and 35% of them are indigenous women, Afro-descendant, and they are the true keepers of our ancestral knowledge, food sovereignty, and care for the earth. And without them, there is no sustainable development possible, nor community democracy. And in that vein, we have played a key role in the Inter-American system to promote the rights of women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings, and structuring a response to that design that is focused on 5 strategic points. First, economic empowerment, particularly through the program Rural Entrepreneur Women. 2, training, and professional and life. Access to services. 3, 4, political participation and leadership. And 5, de-aggregated data focused on gender and territory. That reflects the commitment of Ecuador to gender equality and empowerment of rural women, together with the Inter-American goals. We believe firmly that this program will only be successful if it is built with the dreams, voices, and proposals made by those women who live this reality every day. Social justice goes hand in hand with sustainable development that includes and respects the full rights of women, adolescents, and children living in rural settings. Thank you. Dominican Republic, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Dominican Republic, we are grateful for the inclusion of this point on the order of the day, the commemoration of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings. For the Chair of the SEAM and the Executive Secretary for their presentations, and the panelists for their presentations. This opportunity is timely as we work to promote the rights of women, adolescents, and girls living in rural areas in the Americas, and taking into account the concrete actions that we must take to reduce and even eliminate the historical inequalities that are social and structural in nature, and that affect a population that, according to the Inter-American Cooperation for Agriculture, in 2024, in rural areas in Latin America and the Caribbean, 60 million women lived who are responsible for 30% of food production, but whose work is under-registered and only as 10%, and they only have access to 10% of available financing and very little access to technical assistance. We have to attend to the needs of that population and the food insecurity in which they live, and that is why the Dominican Republic has worked tirelessly to create public policies that support rural women's development with paths towards their visibility and empowerment. And I will highlight just a few here. The agroforestry program for land ownership with a focus on gender, with the goal to reduce historic inequalities that women living in rural settings face in accessing land. The project for resilience and access to land for poor families, which is aimed at overcoming the constant vulnerability and lack of access, as well as instability that families living in rural settings face. Various ministries, including that of agriculture in the Dominican Republic, have worked with rural women to strengthen their capacities, make more visible their role in the productive sector, and also to promote their participation in agricultural sector and value chains. We hope to recognize and promote women as part of a holistic strategy for combating poverty. The project for family agricultural seeks to put women at the head and provide them with the necessary technological and agricultural tools so that they can better inform their work in the field and make enough money to support themselves and their families. The establishment of a dialogue directly with their representative organizations, including the Women Rural Workers Foundation and others, shows that commitment. One of the dimensions of human security that we focused on is food security, which affects women and those living in rural areas. And through hemispheric dialogue at the highest level, we hope to contribute to creating greater equality of opportunity for women living in rural areas. And it is necessary to guarantee food security and protection of the environment. The Dominican Republic is committed to any action that will allow us to overcome poverty and extreme poverty, guarantee economic sovereignty, and also access to economic opportunities for women, adolescents, and girls living in rural settings. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Passa a palavra, delegado.
I now offer the floor to the delegation of Jamaica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Assistant Secretary General Nestor Mendez, permanent representatives alternates. The delegation of Jamaica takes this opportunity to reiterate the condolences extended by the government and people of Jamaica on the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis, whose life exemplifies what it means to love and serve humanity. Thanks to the Executive Secretary, Mora Mora, Tanisha Lee of Rural Network of Jamaica, RADDAC, and the previous presenters for their very informative and inspiring presentations. I'm pleased and truly honored that this important matter of Inter-American Day of Women, Adolescents, and Girls in Rural Settings have been placed on today's agenda, and thanks to the Inter-American Commission on Women for its commitment. Today's engagement is a stark reminder to honor their remarkable social, economic, and contributions to our societies through their hard work, unwavering dedication, and tenacity. Chair, women, adolescents, and girls in rural communities play an indispensable role in every aspect of our societies. They make a significant contribution to our families, environmental sustainability, food securities of our region. And despite this reality, rural women continue to face challenges in accessing land and other vital amenities such as clean running water, inadequate infrastructure, vulnerabilities to climate change, lack of electricity, adequate roads, transportation, affordable health care, and economic opportunities. Even as we highlight the invaluable role that women, adolescents, and girls play in rural communities, we cannot overlook the issue of violence against women and girls, which remains a pervasive on the global scale, with approximately 736 million women having experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner, non-partner sexual violence, or both at least once in their lives. In this context, the government of Jamaica has implemented a national gender policy aimed at achieving gender equality and to mainstream this policy into ministries, departments, and agencies. The Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act of 2021, the Domestic Violence Amendment Act 2023, and the National Strategic Action Plan to eliminate gender-based violence. In our thrust towards achieving gender parity, a policy was also implemented to ensure that 30% representation of either men and women are achieved on all boards. In addition, there are policies and programs in place to protect teenage mothers to ensure that they continue their education and become economically empowered. It is even more important to also highlight that we must ensure that our men and boys are not left behind. My delegation is therefore imploring all relevant stakeholders to invest in women, adolescents, and girls, particularly in rural settings, to ensure access to digital tools, education, decent housing. Such investment is important in promoting progress, igniting change, and shaping a future in which every woman, adolescent, and girl can thrive. We encourage investment not only in their potential, but also in their capacity to lead, innovate, inspire, and transform. Let us build a world where women, adolescents, and girls are valued, respected, empowered to shape their present and future. Together, let us accelerate progress, not just for the sake of women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings, but for the sake of humanity itself. For when we invest in them, we invest in the future, a future that is more just, more equitable, and more prosperous for all. In closing, I leave you all with these words. The true wealth of a community is measured by how carefully it listens to its women and how sincerely it values their wisdom. Empowering women empowers all of us. I thank you.
Passa a palavra à delegação.
I now give the floor to the delegation of Chile. Thank you very much, Chairman, Executive Secretary of the SIM, distinguished panelists. On behalf of the government of Chile, as one of the states that has convened this discussion, I'd like to thank you for your cooperation, as well as all of the teams that have been involved for this successful call for this important commemoration of the Inter-American Day of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings. We greet in particular the Minister of Women's Affairs of Panama in her capacity as President of the SIM, as well as the ministers and other authorities who represent us as states here, for your leadership and dedication in adopting the Inter-American Decade and to expand the efforts undertaken in this forum. Chile celebrates this initiative, which we have supported and promoted from its outset. This commitment has also been highlighted by our Minister of Women's Affairs and Gender Equity, and Andrea Orellana, as Vice President of the SIM. We need to involve women, adolescents, and girls from rural areas in environmental preservation and the development of our territories and in other essential activities. In a context with climate change, insecurity, or inequality and food insecurity have such a drastic impact, it's all the more imperative to guarantee their rights and to guarantee their full and effective participation in all decision-making processes. From Chile, we have adopted specific measures that reflect this commitment, including, among others, the creation of the Rural Women's Program, which has been implemented by the Ministry of Women's Affairs, and the establishment of a Foundation Prodemo, which for more than 30 years has been strengthening the economic autonomy and leadership of peasant women through providing technical services, digital literacy, and support for productive activities. In 2024, we drew up a tourism plan in rural areas headed up by the Deputy Secretary for Tourism, which incorporates a gender perspective and fosters rural and indigenous women's activities in the local economy, including tourism activities. Implementation from the Ministry of Agriculture of its gender agenda 2023-2026 with lines of action to reduce gaps in access to credit, access to land, and productive resources, including differentiated trainings and policies with a territorial focus. Chile's active participation in regional forums such as the Gender Network and Gender and Climate Change Network of the CELAC, the Latin American and Caribbean Community of Latin American and Inter-American and Caribbean states, as well as work done with FAO, UN Women, and ECLA in initiatives geared to assuring the economic autonomy of rural women. All of these actions, in turn, are consistent with Chile's feminist foreign policy, promote the integration of a gender perspective at all levels of public policy, as well as full implementation of the 2030 Agenda and its objectives with respect to gender equality and in particular in rural communities. Chair, going forward in improving the conditions of rural women means we need to an appropriate agenda, disaggregated data, adequate financing. Chile reiterates its commitment to achieving the decade set out for the Inter-American Decade and profoundly values the work of the CIM and of the network of rural women of the region, whose voices are essential for constructing more inclusive, resilient, and equitable democracies. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Uruguay. Thank you very much, Chair. Uruguay is grateful for the presentations by the various panelists at the time in the context of marking the Inter-American Day of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings, and we renew our full commitment to implementing the Inter-American Decade for the rights of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings in the Americas, 2024-2034. Chairman, women, adolescents, and girls who live in rural areas also face, in addition to gender inequities, are subject to other inequalities as a result of their economic, social conditions, their ethnic origin, their sexual orientation, gender identity, immigration status, religion, situation of disability, and location. In this regard, they face intersectional inequalities which combine and make the situation all the more vulnerable. According to the International Fund for Agricultural Development of the UN, it's fundamental to have opportunities for women in order to build more prosperous, inclusive capacities, more capable of confronting global challenges such as climate change and food insecurity. Based on this premise, Uruguay has developed a national plan on agricultural policies together with civil society and with the support of the FAO, which highlights the situation of rural women in agriculture and in rural settings and in agricultural production. Gender stereotypes persist that stand in the way of the life trajectory of women, threatening their autonomy with prejudices around their roles, failing to value their work, limiting their participation, among others. All international and regional agencies have confirmed in their research and reports that women in rural settings contribute significantly to the economy through their work in agricultural production, family farming, and the creation of enterprises. And so it's fundamental to redouble the efforts of the states in this regard. Chairman, Uruguay considers that without gender equity, no sustainable development will be possible. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Paraguay. Thank you, Chair. We also express our gratitude for the presentations made. We take note of them, and we'd also like to highlight Panama's leadership in this area. Paraguay celebrates the commemoration of this Inter-American Day and the beginning of the decade for the rights of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings as a just and necessary recognition for the role they play in our societies, including peasant women and indigenous women. Rural women are fundamental in the production of sustainable production of food as well as in conservation of biodiversity, and therefore their work is more than relevant for guaranteeing food security and to care for the environment. In addition, with their day-to-day work that is not remunerated, rural women make essential contributions to the family and community economy. And of course, they play a key role as leaders and activists in their communities. Nonetheless, these efforts are often undervalued, and the material conditions in which they live are often rendered invisible. For this reason, we celebrate the fact that the CIM has the situation of rural women on its agenda and is working to expand forums in which they can make their voices heard, expressing their needs and their collective grievances. Chairman, in Paraguay, rural women represent 47% of the rural population. Thus, with a view to guaranteeing their economic, social, political, and cultural rights, in 2015, Law 5416 was adopted. It's a law on public policies for rural women, whose implementation is entrusted to the Ministry for Women's Affairs. And even though my country is facing various and complex challenges in order to overcome the obstacles that stand in the way of the full enjoyment of these rights, including structural discrimination and the structural discrimination and violence that affects them, Paraguay reaffirms its commitment to continue promoting and defending well-being, dignity, and economic empowerment of these women, particularly in the framework of this decade. Thank you very much. I now recognize Bolivia. Ambassador, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegations, the plurinational state of Bolivia welcomes with profound respect and conviction this commemoration of the Inter-American Day of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings of the Americas. We come together with the spirit of fraternity and solidarity with those states who have raised up their voices for those women who day after day uphold with dignity, wisdom, and work life in our rural areas, mountains, forests, and border areas. We celebrate the presentations by the Ministry of Women's Affairs of Panama, Nurka Palacio, the Executive Secretary of the SIM, Alejandra Mora Mora, who is right here, the Executive Secretary of the Red LAC, Luz Aro Warenga, and the presence of the Women's Rural Producers Network of Jamaica. This date is fundamental resonance. About 50% of our rural population are women. They are guardians of the ancestral content, producers of food, defenders of natural resources. They are caregivers for community life. They are Aymara, Quechua, Guarani, Afro-Bolivian women, Mestizo women, peasant women, and women of all our plurality who have upheld generations with unique strength in our country. Resolution 1254, which institutes this day and starts the Inter-American Decade for all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings, represents for Bolivia a historic opportunity because making viable, protecting, strengthening these women is not only an act of justice, it is an ethical, economic, and civilization-related imperative. Our our Constitution explicitly recognizes equality of men and women, and it enshrines the rights of peasant and indigenous communities. This has allowed for the development of public policies geared to food sovereignty, the participation of rural women in decision-making positions, and access to land, education, and justice. Yet the challenges persist, and they are deep. Structural gaps persist, unequal access to basic services, gender-based violence, invisibility in decision-making. That is why we hopefully welcome the hemispheric agenda pushed by the SIM and networks like Red LAC that promote voices from the region to promote voices to transform the situation of women for and by women. We can say there is no democracy without territorial justice, nor substantive freedom without the leadership of rural women. In Bolivia, like many other countries of the Americas, rural girls and young women are often assigned to domestic tasks in the cities, often from a very young age. They were assigned to families where they would perform a work called, in our country, cama adentro, bed within, which was a form of slavery, a way of usurping the work of others, oftentimes in conditions that were very questionable from an ethical and standpoint and in a health standpoint. Approximately 20 years ago, with the arrival of the transformation the process of economic, social, political, and cultural change and transformation has been sharply reduced. And the first women minister of our country during the presidency of Evo Morales was precisely a domestic worker, a woman who came from the depths of the countryside and came to occupy the position of Minister of Justice as a sign of reparation. The situation And these situations should be corrected and really should be erased from our countries and from our region. On this day, we honor the steps taken and we renew our commitment to living rural situations in which every woman and girl has their rights not just on a piece of paper, but rather that these rights be effective and that they be respected and experienced every day. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Guatemala. Thank you very much, Chairman. Guatemala recognizes the importance of commemorating the Inter-American Day of all women, adolescents, and girls in rural settings, and is grateful for the presentation of the report by the Inter-American Commission of Women, the presentation by the Executive Secretary of the Network of Rural Women of Latin America and the Caribbean, and the statement by the Network of Rural Women Producers of Jamaica and Guatemala. We've had the 12th survey of population and housing. Rural women represent 45.8% of all women in the country, which is equivalent to approximately 23.6% of the total population being. And so for us, this topic is of the utmost importance. And so I'm going to highlight some of the actions that the government of Guatemala has implemented according to it. Our country has had significant gains in relation to the rights of women and girls in rural areas. Efforts that are aligned with our international commitments, in particular with the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, known as CEDAW. In the legislative and institutional area, I'd like to highlight promulgation of Decree 39/2016, which reformed the municipal code in order to establish municipal women's offices in the 340 municipalities of our country. In particular, for the Maya, Garifuna, and Xinca peoples, in keeping with the principle of non-discrimination, essential services have been strengthened, including the National Registry of Persons, thus guaranteeing a linguistically and culturally appropriate approach. In education, Guatemala has carried out more than 11,000 interventions in public schools, prioritizing the rural areas, which has significantly improved conditions for learning of girls and adolescent women. Also, strategic partnerships have been established for the technical training of women who are in vulnerable circumstances. In the area of health, the Ministry of Public Health and Social Assistance has reorganized the territorial system through a model of care and management by areas of health, making possible care more appropriate to the specific needs of rural communities. Through this model, more than 4,300 health centers were strengthened nationwide with a focus on equity and cultural appropriateness. A priority issue for Guatemala is access to lands and productive resources for rural and indigenous women. Through the Land Fund, mechanisms have been set forth for peasant women to acquire lands, and training in human rights has also been provided. From 2021 to 2023, more than 55% of the beneficiaries of the program for regularization of land title were women. Protection for cultural and ethnic identity has been a priority. Categories have been included for Afro-descendants and Creole persons in the national surveys to ensure their visibility. The ombudsperson for indigenous women has come up with a strategic approach to give visibility to the inequalities suffered by Maya, Xinca, and Garifuna women. In addition, there have been trainings in human rights leadership and political participation, as well as seed capital programs for the economic entrepreneurship of indigenous women. Finally, in terms of planning and institutionalization, Guatemala has gone forward with integrating women and the ethnic variable in the national public investment system, thanks to the work of the Secretary for Planning and Programming, of the presidency of the Republic. In addition, the Ministry of Labor and Social Security and the Ministry of Economy, together with the Secretariat for Public Works, have given impetus to programs that foster employability, entrepreneurship, and economic autonomy for more than 48,000 women. Chairman, to conclude, we reiterate our firm commitment to the rights of women and girls in rural settings as a fundamental condition for democracy, for an inclusive democracy, and for a peaceful society. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Brazil. Thank you, Chair. We are grateful for the inclusion of this item on our agenda today. In particular, we thank the delegation of Mexico for its leadership. I'd also like to thank the authorities and panelists who, with their remarks, have helped us a great deal to reflect on the work already done and on the ways to continue going forward with implementing the Inter-American Decade and the Hemispheric Agenda on Rural Women. Chairman, the rights of rural women is an issue dear to the Brazilian government. Our Ministry for Agrarian Development has a specific secretariat dedicated to rural women, directly linked to its executive secretary. The objective being to promote a gender perspective in a cross-cutting way across all policies carried out by it. We believe that the economic independence of women is essential in order for them to fully realize their human rights and for the economic and social development of our country, as well as equal access, just as equal access to land is fundamental for there to be land tenure justice. We are a signatory of the Convention Against All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We defend regularizing land title, giving priority to rural women, particularly Quilombola and Afro-Brazilian women, and indigenous women, I should say. We are promoting the economic autonomy of women together with cooperatives and priority projects. Therefore, we have policies that value and empower women through expansion of access to credit and new programs, specific programs for rural women. Among the initiatives that have been designed specifically to support rural women, we highlight, for example, Pronafe Woman, which is the national program for strengthening family farming. With differentiated conditions in terms of interest rates and times for periods for paying, this program not only facilitates access to credit and promotes the economic autonomy of rural women, it also offers technical assistance and technological transfer, as well as transfer of innovative practices. We also highlight the program for the development of women, Fomento Mulher, which is specifically geared to women who own lots in agrarian reform settlements, and it offers productive projects that promote the autonomy of such women. Finally, the program on the productive and economic organization of rural women is another example of a specific action that seeks to guarantee the economic autonomy of women in the countryside. The program promotes public policies that stimulate productive and economic processes geared to producing food and for healthy and sustainable development. The Brazilian government recognized the fundamental role of rural women in the national economy, even though it's often rendered invisible. We also recognize the essential contribution of such women as agents of social and economic change. We will continue to be committed to promoting their rights. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the delegation of Haiti. Chairman, I thank you for giving me the floor once again. The delegation of Haiti would like to join colleagues in celebrating this. We thank the mission of Peru on occasion of the death of illustrious writer Mario Vargas Llosa. And also we extend our condolences to the Holy See representative to the OAS on the death of Pope Francis. He's been a leader of Catholics around the world, and he will always be remembered for his contributions to peace and fraternity among all peoples, as well as his struggle for justice for immigrants, as well as for the poorest and most vulnerable. Pope Francis was also a great defender of the cause of Haiti. Thank you for adding this point to our order of business. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Minister of Women's Affairs of Panama, the President of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Ms. Murka Palacio, and the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Commission of Women, Alejandra Mora, for their respective work on the report of the SIM on implementing the Inter-American Decade of on women, on all women, adolescents, and girls 2024 to 2034. We also thank Ms. Luz Aro Guanga, who leads the Network of Rural Women of Latin America and the Caribbean, and Natalia Arvid of the Network of Rural Women Producers of Jamaica for their remarks. The actions for implementing the Inter-American Decade 2024-2034 recalls the importance of the struggle for emancipation of women in rural areas who for too long were rendered invisible and were ostracized in public spaces by a patriarchal, dominant and oppressive system. The implementation activities also remind us that fighting discrimination against women in rural areas is permanent and must be pursued throughout the Americas, particularly through inclusive and dynamic public policies for greater recognition of the role of women for economic, social, political, and cultural development of their communities. Women in rural areas are the backbone of the Haitian economy in households and in agriculture and trade. We need to recognize the many issues they face that stand at the way of the development of the country. We encourage their organizations, as well as the organizations of the Inter-American System, to strengthen initiatives aimed at eliminating the structural weakness and obstacles that limit their economic prosperity. I express full solidarity and empathy for women, not only women in rural areas, but all women who are facing gender-based violence and systemic violence, particularly indigenous women, racialized women, women who are victims of human trafficking, and women who are discriminated against because of their nationality when they go abroad. I have a special thought for the Haitian women who have been victims of sexual and sexist violence by the armed groups that have terrorized the Haitian population. I reiterate once again that the Haitian government requires support for the security forces. We dream of creating a society soon in which women, adolescents, and girls in particular can grow up without being harmed, without violation of their rights. Thank you so much for your attention. I now give the floor to the delegation of the United States.
Thank you, Chair. The United States strongly supports the protection and empowerment of women and girls, including those in rural settings across the hemisphere. Upholding their rights and expanding opportunity is essential to our shared security and prosperity. In rural areas, women and girls often face compounding barriers: limited access to education, healthcare, financial tools, and vulnerability to violence. These gaps contribute directly to regional instability and displacement. High levels of violence in rural and other areas are a major but under-addressed driver of illegal immigration. Rural women and girls, both at home, where there is often less access to law enforcement, and those on the move, are especially vulnerable to human trafficking, forced labor, and violence. Protecting their safety and dignity must be central to regional security efforts. Addressing the drivers that push rural women and girls to leave their communities, such as violence and economic insecurity, should remain a key priority across regional cooperation and assistance efforts. The United States continues to lead on these fronts. President Trump signed the Women, Peace, and Security Act of 2017, which ensures women's protection and participation are integrated across U.S. development, diplomacy, and security programs, reaching rural and underserved communities. Through the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiative and the Women's Entrepreneurship and Economic Empowerment Act, the U.S. has advanced rural women's access to credit, markets, and vocational training, empowering millions to generate income and improve conditions in their communities. My government has also prioritized rural development through policy and programmatic action. Executive Order 13790 on promoting agriculture and rural prosperity focuses on job creation, infrastructure, and education in rural communities. And the Executive Order on improving rural health and telehealth access emphasizes improved access to essential care, including for women in isolated areas. These efforts continue. The United States has extended Medicare telehealth flexibilities through 2025, allowing rural clinics and federally qualified health centers to better serve women and girls with limited healthcare access. And the newly created Make America Healthy Again Commission, established in February, aims to reduce chronic disease and expand telehealth solutions in rural America with a strong focus on maternal and preventative care. Rural women also benefit from expanded advanced primary care services through rural health clinics designed to improve outcomes and reduce barriers to continuous care. Chair and colleagues, strengthening women's economic and physical security, especially in rural areas, reinforces regional stability and prosperity, and it sets the U.S. approach apart from coercive models promoted by authoritarian actors. In closing, we appreciate the chance to share our views on this topic, and we urge the OAS to focus on the many structural barriers facing today's rural women and girls, especially those that fuel insecurity, violence, and illegal immigration. Thank you.
Delegação de
Honduras, you have the floor. Thank you, Chairman. This is the first time that I've taken the floor on behalf of Honduras's mission. I would like to express my profound condolences for the death of the Peruvian author Mario Vargas Llosa and Pope Francisco. On this commemoration of the Inter-American Day of All Women, Adolescents, and Girls in Rural Settings, we recognize the invaluable contributions of those who, from the fields, sustain our communities and nations. Honduras has reaffirmed its commitment to gender equality in rural areas through active participation in the Inter-American Commission for Rights of Rural Women to design public policies that help women gain access, rural women gain access to lands, services, and participate actively in political decision making. We've had fora and workshops to focus and promote women's leadership and economic sovereignty of many rural women. And through the Secretariat of Women, we have constantly worked on the rights of women in rural settings to promote also the tools that are necessary for development, because we believe that sustainable development has the face of a woman, and we hope that this will lead us to a more equal rural area. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Não havendo mais pedidos de
Not seeing further requests for the floor, we'd like to thank our distinguished panelists for their remarks, as well as the contributions of delegates. I'd like to thank the permanent missions of Bolivia, Canada, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Panama, Dominican Republic, St. Lucia, Uruguay, and Brazil for their collaboration in fulfilling this mandate. We suggest that the Permanent Council take note of the presentations and remarks made, which will be in the minutes of this session, and thereby fulfilling the mandate established in Resolution 1254 of the Council. Seeing no objections, it is so agreed. Now we will pass on to the consideration of the last item on the agenda. Upon request of delegations from Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Uruguay, I offer the floor to Ambassador Sebastian Kralevich, permanent representative from Chile, to read his remarks on this International Transgender Day of visibility. You have the floor. Thank you. On this International Transgender Day of Visibility, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, and Uruguay reaffirm the idea that trans women are women, trans men are men, and that those living two-spirit or as with diverse identities be fully respected throughout the Americas. Reiterate our commitment, our unbreakable commitment to the dignity, equality, and full inclusion of those individuals in every corner of society. Transgender people and who live with diverse gender identities enrich our democracies and our societies. Today, we celebrate their invaluable contributions to, at the same time that we recognize the discrimination, violence, and systemic challenges that they continue to face. The Inter-American Commission has, on reiterated occasions, cited the alarming rates of violence and discrimination perpetuated against trans people in the Americas, and has urged member states to prevent and address these human rights violations. At the same time, recognize the resilience and the leadership of the trans community, who continue to fight for justice, equality, and their full participation in all spaces of life. To protect and empower trans people and those living with diverse gender identities requires recognizing the diversity of challenges and intersectional problems that they face, including race, ethnicity, disability, and socioeconomic status. That includes recognizing the lived experiences of Indigenous people who have diverse gender identities and whose traditions and identities have been part of our cultures throughout the hemisphere. And for a long time, we recognize these diverse experiences. They must be recognized and integrated intentionally in this roadmap to justice and peace for all people. Let's be clear. Trans rights are human rights. No one should be denied rights due to their identity or gender expression. Today and every day, we are in solidarity with trans people, binaries, people, two-spirits, and those of diverse gender identity throughout the hemisphere. We reaffirm our commitment to inclusion, equality, and respect for all people and promotion of LGBTQ+ rights. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ambassador. I offer the floor to any delegate who might wish to speak to this item. Mexico, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We thank the Permanent Mission of Chile for these shared remarks formed by this group, LGBTQ+ group. Mexico is a proud member of at the OAS, and on this day to commemorate transgender visibility, we would like to highlight our varied activities carried out by the Secretariat of Women to answer the question, why is trans visibility important, which took place on March 25th. There was an event and there was a forum, Trans Visibility, Progress and Challenges in Mexico, which took place on March 26th. On 27th, we also had a meeting with the Secretariat for Women, Citlali Hernandez, to receive questions and proposals from the trans and non-binary communities as a result of the forum. And on that occasion, Secretary Hernandez highlighted the importance of making more visible all the sectors of society that are excluded, and to make a tour of the country to meet with all governors of the states of the Republic in order to discuss with them the importance of having specialized units for crimes against trans people. From the Secretariat of Women, the administration of President Claudia Sheinbaum promotes the recognition not just of gender and sexual identity diversity, but also to make more visible the trans community as the most vulnerable. In the words of Secretary Hernandez, in the struggle for sexual visibility in the LGBTQ plus community, we also have to see a profound battle against the patriarchy. Mexico urges all states to continue to promote and protect the human rights of people in all their diversity under the principles of universality and visibility, interdependence, and non-aggression. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brazil, you have the floor. Thank you, Chair. We'd like to thank the Permanent Mission of Chile, who, on behalf of Bolivia, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Mexico, Uruguay, members of the nuclear group LGBTQ plus of the OAS, commemorate this Transgender Day of Visibility. Thank you for including this point on the agenda. This started in 2019 to recognize and celebrate this opportunity to celebrate the diversity of the trans community. For more than 21 years, we have recognized trans visibility. Up to today, President Lula also joined this trend in his government, and in fighting for respect and equality for this population, the trans population. These dates also aim to promote the rights of citizens. And since 2023, Brazil has had a national secretariat for the rights of LGBTQ plus people. And the Ministry of Human Rights and Citizenship promotes it. Sinlavit, the secretary, is a trans woman. And Brazil has a historic debt with the trans population because they have suffered many years simply for being who they are. Transphobia has been considered a crime for several years, and this as a result of the violence we see perpetuated against that community. And it is penalized with up to 5 years in prison. In order to promote and protect the rights of that community, in Brazil and beyond, we have to recognize that this population continues to be the victim of violence. They do not have access to basic services like education, justice, and the health system. We believe that we must combat violence and denounce any transphobia that we see as a violation, a human rights violation, and that is why the Office of Human Rights, which is a public-facing office that focuses on human rights violations, particularly against those living in condition of vulnerability. Mr. Chair, Brazil recognizes the long route that we have to walk in order to fully recognize the rights of the trans community, and we reaffirm our commitment to achieve that progress. Thank you very much. Bolivia, you have the floor. Mr. Chair, the plurinational state of Bolivia recognizes this point on the agenda and thanks its inclusion. We echo the words of thanks and the full recognition of rights of the trans community and LGBTQ plus communities, reaffirming that trans rights are, without doubt, human rights that must be protected and defended. Bolivia, from its political constitution, approved in 2019, recognizes the plurinational character of the country, and diversity is one of the pillars of our institutional framework. And Article 14 prohibits any form of discrimination based on sex, gender identity, or sexual orientation. And it's not only a legal mandate, but also a firm commitment on our part to respect human dignity and social justice. In that context, we must highlight the promotion of a law for gender identity that was approved in May 2016 that guarantees the rights of trans people to change their name, sex, and other personal data on all public documents, and that has been recognized by international bodies as an important step forward towards the full guarantee of the rights of trans people in the region. Bolivia is aware of the intractable problems, social exclusion, limited access to basic services, and institutional barriers that continue to affect disproportionately trans people and non-binary people in our societies. But our country has also taken firm steps forward, and from community work for defending human rights to the public policies promoted from our government, which I've already spoken to. When it comes to equality of opportunity, we have guidelines for institutions to sanction, identify, prevent, and sanction any discrimination based on sexual identity or orientation. Mr. Chair, we also recognize the contributions on the part of the trans community in social, political, and academic circles in our country. They are active participants in our more inclusive and participatory democratic process, and trans people should not just be protected, but they should be listened to, and they should also be represented. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has, on reiterated occasions, highlighted the hate speech crimes and other violence that suffer trans people in the Americas. And it's important for member states to respond with public policies that are effective and transformational in nature, with a institutional narrative that will not allow for any exclusion whatsoever. From Bolivia, we reiterate our commitment to equality and the full participation of every person, independent of their gender identity. We have reaffirmed that no one should be denied any rights or denied their humanity because of who they are. Today and every day, we stand in solidarity with trans people, non-binary people, two-spirit people throughout the hemisphere. We recognize their voices, their resilience, and we renew our commitment to shared inclusion, social justice, and the protection of their rights. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Uruguay, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, Uruguay, thanks Chile's permanent mission for the remarks made on behalf of the Central Group for LGBTQ+ rights. Uruguay is also part. Every March, we celebrate the International Trans Day of Visibility, where we commemorate different trans leaders in order to highlight the diversity of this community and their contributions to society. In Uruguay, we understand that social policies have to be managed from a human rights perspective. And from that focus, we have to guarantee every inhabitant of Uruguay has full access to their human rights. In 2018, we also passed the law for gender identity for trans people, which allows them, affords them a life free of discrimination, and there are mechanisms in place and methodologies to prevent, attend, and protect, as well as promote and repair any form of discrimination when it comes to housing or health and other sectors of trans people. We have the right to live as we wish, independent of our anatomic, morphologic, anatomical, or other labels. We have made it legal for any person to be able to change their personal information on official documents, and to protect victims of gender-based violence. Mr. Chair, despite the positive steps forward, trans people in Uruguay, along with other parts of the world, continue to be very vulnerable. Protecting their human rights and those of LGBTQ+ population have not always been equal. We've seen advances for some and not for others, and there are still severe socioeconomic challenges, discrimination in the labor market, and high levels of violence. We've seen progress vary, and it has been difficult to overcome the barrier of those legal frameworks that do not recognize trans people's right to self-define. They face multiple forms of discrimination, and overcoming those forms is absolutely necessary for developing effective and peace-promoting public policies. Many thanks.
Passo a palavra à delegação observadora da França.
France, Observer State, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, ambassadors, permanent members, allow me to first greet or welcome this initiative on the part of this group to commemorate today the International Transgender Day of Visibility. France hopes to see the promotion of all legal frameworks that will allow for people to live as they wish and to be respected, as called for in various international texts, the right to not be discriminated against, the right to safety and liberty for every person. Since 2022, our diplomatic efforts have included an ambassador for LGBTQ+ and trans issues to fight back against discrimination and violence perpetuated against the trans population, and that is one of our priorities for France's foreign policy. France also has recognized the persecution and violence as a reason for granting exile to people of that community. France encourages member states of the OAS to commit and reaffirm their commitment to protecting this vulnerable population, creating effective policies that will respect them and create an adequate legal framework to protect those citizens. We also affirm the imperative for all international actors to respect trans rights, notably the right to self-identify in documents and identification, and having unfettered access to health, education, employment opportunities, and economic participation. Thank you very much.
Não havendo mais pedidos de palavra, a presidência sugere que...
Seeing no more requests for the floor, I suggest that we make note of the declaration as read, and seeing no objections, it is so agreed.
Do dia desta sessão, mas antes de dar...
Now we will wrap up, but before I give the floor to the delegations that might wish to speak to other business, I'd like to remind the delegations that we will have a meeting on May 5th. It's protocolary. Documentation was shared last week, and with that, I offer the floor to those delegations that might wish to speak to other business. Ecuador, you have the floor. Ecuador is pleased to inform the Permanent Council that on April 13th, the Ecuadorian population peacefully and openly and in a large number exercised its right to vote and re-elected President Daniel Noboa Asin. This is a reaffirmation of the democratic vocation of the Ecuadorian people. This was a historic victory with 10 percentage points of difference. And it was a democratic expression where adults and young people voted, and the will of the Ecuadorian people was respected. But we reject certain isolated incidents, such as the theft of electoral material in Venezuela, which undermined democracy in Ecuador and stability in the region. We have seen various electoral observation missions from the European Union, the OAS, and they ratified the transparency and trustworthiness of the results of the elections, which were carried out peacefully and in the regular spaces with a high national participation. I would also like to express our appreciation for the words of congratulations expressed by heads of state and government and other foreign governments. And we also appreciate the international community's support for this democratic expression, particularly the member states of this organization who, through different signs of friendship and fraternity, have supported President Noboa Sin and the Ecuadorian population so that he might continue to guide the country's path forward over the next 4 years. Thank you very much. Guatemala, you have the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Guatemala would just like to remind the permanent members and the alternate members that or invite you to please join us during the session with Carlos Alvarado, the Foreign Minister of Guatemala, in the Museum of the Americas just after this session of the Permanent Council. Many thanks, and we hope to see you there. Colombia, you have the floor. President, or Chair, today is also an important day for the commemoration of the Day of Language. It's the Spanish language. And so in commemoration of that, and as the coordinator of the ENYE group, I am inviting each and every one of you to the closure of our cinema session that we carry out in the theater in the Colombian embassy. We will be sharing a film on aviation, and you are all cordially invited. We hope to see you there. It will be at the theater. And we hope that the audience will reflect our aspirations, our sky-high aspirations. Peru, you have the floor.
Chairman, I express gratitude for the moment of silence and the various expressions of condolence in the course of the session over the passing of Mario Vargas Llosa, a key figure in Peruvian culture, which occurred in Lima a few days ago. The literary work of Mario Vargas Llosa began with the publication in 1959 of a collection of stories called Los Jefes. His first three novels, The City of the Dogs of 1963, Casa Verde 1966, and Conversation in the Cathedral 1969, positioned him as a key figure, together with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Carlos Fuentes, and Julio Cortázar, of the boom that gave worldwide relevance to Latin American literature. Those initial novels were followed by other equally memorable ones, Pantaleón y la Visitadora of 1973, and Julia and the Writer of 1977. However, his greatest work was The War of the End of the World of 1981, which recreated in a magistral way the various misunderstandings which gave rise to a war in northeastern Brazil in the late 19th century. His literary production never ended. It includes 21 novels, 15 essays, 9 movies, and his autobiography, Pez y el Agua, which is a counterpoint as between his first years and his temporary time in politics in 1990 as a candidate for president in the most dramatic times in the history of the Republic of Peru. Even though he lost those elections, his liberal thinking led to structural reforms which relaunched our country in the following years. Vargas Llosa persuaded Peruvians that the role of the state in economy and society should be delimited. The state should only recognize and protect the fundamental rights to liberty, life, liberty, and property, and that everyone should be treated as equals, nothing more, nothing less. As he has just died, there's so much left in his novels. Santiago Zavala, Conversation in the Cathedral, and Julia and the Writer. They have characters who resist injustices and surrounding brutality. In that regard, despite his fragility and vulnerability, his conduct has a heroic dimension. The same can be said of That is, the characters had that. But the same can be said of Vargas Llosa. His numerous opinion columns were called Contra Viento y Marea. Vargas Llosa affirmed in his columns the importance of individual responsibility, the importance of principles, and gentlemanly treatment as among persons. And so we bid you farewell, saying that you have brought to our ancestors of Arequipa and to this whole hemisphere liberty. So may you rest in peace. There being no more requests for the floor, and thanking everyone for your participation, that concludes the session. Thank you.